December 7th, 1941, 7:02 a.m. A mobile radar station on the northern tip of Oahu Island detected something extraordinary: a massive formation of aircraft approaching from the north. For 7 critical minutes, 2 young Army privates tracked over 180 planes heading directly toward Pearl Harbor. They reported their findings. They were dismissed. Those 7 minutes represented America's last chance to avoid catastrophe. This is the untold story of the warning that could have saved Pearl Harbor, the chain of miscommunications that doomed it, and how 7 minutes of ignored intelligence changed the course of World War II forever. The eyes that saw too much. Private Joseph Lockhart and Private George Elliott had been operating the SCR-270 mobile radar station at Apana Point since 4 a.m. The SCR-270 was cutting-edge technology for 1941, a primitive but functional early warning system that could detect aircraft up to 150 miles away. The radar station was part of America's first experiment with electronic early warning. 6 mobile units had been positioned around Oahu Island to provide advance notice of approaching aircraft. The system was so new that most operators, including Lockhart and Elliott, had received only basic training. At 7:02 a.m., their radar screen lit up with the largest signal either had ever seen. The return was so strong that Lockhart initially thought the equipment was malfunctioning. He checked the connections, adjusted the settings, and ran through diagnostic procedures. But the signal remained, growing stronger by the minute. Elliott, the less experienced operator, had never seen anything like it. The signal represented a formation of aircraft that dwarfed anything in the American arsenal. "This is the biggest thing I've ever seen on this scope," he told Lockhart. Lockhart, who had 3 months more experience with the radar, quickly calculated the formation's bearing, distance, and approximate size. The aircraft were approaching from 137 degrees, roughly 3 points east of north, at a distance of 132 miles. But it was the size of the formation that made his blood run cold. The radar return suggested at least 180 aircraft, possibly more. In 1941, the largest American formation ever assembled contained fewer than 100 planes. No peaceful mission would require such a massive air armada. No scheduled training exercise involved formations of this magnitude. Something was terribly wrong. At 7:03 a.m., Lockhart made the first of what would become a series of increasingly desperate attempts to warn Pearl Harbor. He called the information center at Fort Shafter, the nerve center responsible for coordinating air defense around Oahu. The phone rang and rang. The information center was supposed to operate 24 hours a day, but budget constraints had reduced weekend hours. On Sunday mornings, the center typically closed at 7 a.m. Lockhart was calling into an empty building. The fatal dismissal. Finally, at 7:04 a.m., someone answered the phone. Lieutenant Kermit Tyler, a pursuit pilot with minimal training in radar operations, had volunteered to stay late at the information center to gain experience with the new electronic systems. Lockhart quickly explained what he was seeing: a massive formation of unidentified aircraft approaching from the north at high speed. The formation was now 130 miles out and closing fast at approximately 180 miles per hour. Based on their current heading, the aircraft would reach Oahu in approximately 43 minutes. Lieutenant Tyler listened to the report with growing skepticism. Several factors influenced his decision to dismiss the warning. First, he knew that a flight of B-17 Flying Fortresses was scheduled to arrive from California that morning. The Army Air Forces had been expecting this flight for several days. Second, Tyler had been told that a local radio station, KGMB, had been broadcasting music all night to guide the incoming B-17s. The station's transmissions could serve as a homing beacon for aircraft approaching from the mainland. The timing seemed to match. Third, Tyler's limited radar training hadn't prepared him to interpret the significance of formation size. He didn't understand that 180-plus aircraft represented an impossibly large flight, far exceeding any peaceful mission the United States might conduct. "Don't worry about it," Tyler told Lockhart at 7:05 a.m. "It's probably the B-17s coming in from California." Lockhart tried to explain that the formation was far too large to be the expected B-17 flight, which consisted of only 12 aircraft. But Tyler had made his decision. The warning was officially dismissed. For the next 2 minutes, Lockhart and Elliott continued tracking the approaching formation. The aircraft maintained their heading toward Oahu, showing no signs of the navigation adjustments that would be expected from a friendly flight. Their speed remained constant at 180 miles per hour, faster than the cruising speed of B-17s, but consistent with military fighters at combat power. At 7:07 a.m., Lockhart made one final attempt to raise the alarm. He called the information center again, hoping to reach someone with more authority or better training. But Tyler was the only person on duty, and his mind was made up. The radar operators watched helplessly as the massive formation continued its approach. At 7:09 a.m., the formation disappeared from their screens, not because it had turned away, but because the aircraft had moved too close for the radar to track effectively. The SCR-270 had a minimum detection range, and the approaching formation had entered it. Those 7 minutes, from first detection at 7:02 to final radar contact at 7:09, represented America's last chance to prepare for what was coming: the approaching storm. What Lockhart and Elliott had detected was the first wave of Operation Z, Japan's meticulously planned surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. The formation consisted of 183 aircraft launched from 6 aircraft carriers positioned 200 miles north of Oahu. The attack force was led by Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, flying a Nakajima B-5N torpedo bomber. Behind him flew 49 more torpedo bombers, 51 Aichi D-3A dive bombers, 43 Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters, and 40 high-altitude bombers. It was the largest carrier-based airstrike in history. Japanese planners had spent months studying American defensive procedures and capabilities. They knew about the radar installations, but had counted on the element of surprise and the Americans' unfamiliarity with their own equipment. The dismissal of Lockhart's warning exceeded their most optimistic expectations. As the Japanese formation flew toward Pearl Harbor, American forces remained in their peacetime Sunday morning routine. Ships lay at anchor with skeleton crews. Aircraft sat parked in neat rows on airfields, positioned to prevent sabotage rather than air attack. Anti-aircraft guns remained unmanned, their ammunition locked in storage bunkers. At Naval Air Station Ford Island, the duty officer was planning the day's recreational activities. At Hickam Field, airmen were preparing for a softball tournament. At Wheeler Field, pilots slept late, unaware that enemy fighters were minutes away from their base. The information center at Fort Shafter remained nearly empty. Lieutenant Tyler had left shortly after dismissing Lockard's report, confident that he had correctly identified the approaching aircraft as friendly B-17s. No additional alerts were issued. No defensive measures were implemented. At 7:40 a.m., the first wave of Japanese aircraft reached the northern coast of Oahu. Commander Fuchida surveyed the scene below and couldn't believe his luck. Pearl Harbor lay before him like a training exercise, ships perfectly positioned for attack, no fighters rising to meet them, no anti-aircraft fire filling the sky. At 7:49 a.m., Fuchida transmitted the code phrase that would echo through history. Tora, 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 Tiger, 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 indicating that complete surprise had been achieved. 3 minutes later, at 7:52 a.m., the first bombs fell on Ford Island. The attack that 7 minutes of ignored radar warnings could have prevented had begun. The catastrophe unfolds. The Japanese attack unfolded with devastating precision. Dive bombers screamed down on Battleship Row while torpedo planes skimmed across the harbor at mast height. Zeros strafed airfields, destroying American aircraft before they could take off. High-altitude bombers targeted fuel storage tanks and repair facilities. Within the first 10 minutes, 4 battleships had been torpedoed or bombed. The USS Oklahoma capsized after taking multiple torpedo hits. The USS West Virginia settled to the harbor bottom, trapping dozens of sailors inside. The USS California began listing heavily as water poured through massive hull breaches. But it was the attack on the USS Arizona that would become the enduring symbol of Pearl Harbor's devastation. At 8:06 a.m., a Japanese bomber scored a direct hit on the ship's forward ammunition magazine. The explosion, equivalent to 1,000 tons of TNT, was felt 10 miles away. The Arizona disappeared in a fireball that rose over 500 feet into the air. The destruction might have been significantly reduced if the radar warning had been heeded. 7 minutes of preparation time could have allowed anti-aircraft batteries to be manned and ready. The Pacific Fleet had hundreds of AA guns, but most were unmanned when the attack began. Alert gun crews could have engaged the Japanese aircraft as they approached their targets. Fighter aircraft to be launched from Oahu's 3 military airfields. The Army Air Forces and Navy had nearly 400 aircraft on the island, including modern P-40 Warhawks and F-4F Wildcats capable of engaging Japanese Zeros on equal terms. Ships to initiate damage control procedures. Watertight doors could have been sealed, firefighting equipment readied, and damage control parties positioned. These measures might not have prevented hits, but could have reduced their severity. Warning messages to be transmitted to other Pacific bases. The attack on Pearl Harbor was part of a coordinated offensive against American and British positions throughout the Pacific. Early warning might have helped other bases prepare for similar attacks. Instead, American forces were caught completely off guard. The response was heroic but disorganized. Individual sailors and soldiers fought back with whatever weapons they could find, but coordinated defense was impossible. Captain Mervyn Bennion of the USS West Virginia continued directing his ship's defense even after being mortally wounded by shrapnel. Seaman First Class James Ward ran through strafing fire to deliver ammunition to anti-aircraft guns. At Hickam Field, Ground crews attempted to disperse aircraft while under constant attack. By 9:45 a.m., the first wave of Japanese aircraft was withdrawing. A second wave attacked from 8:54 to 9:45 a.m., targeting installations that had escaped the initial assault. When the last Japanese plane disappeared over the horizon, Pearl Harbor was a scene of unprecedented devastation. The bitter reckoning. The final toll was staggering. 2,403 Americans killed, 1,178 wounded, 18 ships sunk or heavily damaged, including 8 battleships, 347 aircraft destroyed or damaged. It was the worst defeat in American naval history. But the human cost extended far beyond the casualty figures. The attack shattered America's sense of security and isolation. For the first time since the War of 1812, the American homeland had been successfully attacked by a foreign power. In the days following the attack, investigators began examining what had gone wrong. The radar detection quickly emerged as one of the most painful revelations. America had possessed the technology to detect the approaching attack force, had received clear warning of its approach, and had dismissed that warning due to inexperience and poor judgment. Private Lockhart and Private Elliott were haunted by the knowledge that they had detected the attack 50 minutes before it began. Both men volunteered for combat duty and served with distinction throughout the war, but they never forgot those 7 minutes when they held Pearl Harbor's fate in their hands. Lieutenant Kermit Tyler faced a military investigation, but was ultimately cleared of wrongdoing. The official conclusion was that his decision, while tragic in hindsight, was reasonable given his limited training and the information available at the time. He continued to serve throughout the war, but the events of December 7th shadowed his career. The radar warning wasn't the only intelligence failure that morning. Magic intercepts had revealed Japanese diplomatic intentions. Reconnaissance flights had been reduced due to budget constraints. Communication problems prevented warnings from reaching key commanders. But the 7 minutes at Opana Point represented the closest America came to avoiding disaster. In those brief moments, technology and human vigilance had combined to provide advance warning of the most significant attack in American history. The failure to act on that warning would forever serve as a reminder of how quickly security can be lost when vigilance fails. December 7th, 1941, changed America forever. But it began with 7 minutes of ignored radar warnings. 7 minutes when Private Joseph Lockhart and Private George Elliott watched history approach on their primitive green screen. Their story reminds us that the most sophisticated technology is only as effective as the humans who interpret it. Early warning systems, intelligence networks, and defensive preparations mean nothing if decision-makers lack the training, authority, or wisdom to act on critical information. The 7 minutes at Opana Point became a turning point, not just for Pearl Harbor, but for how America approaches national security. Never again would radar warnings be dismissed so casually. Never again would early detection systems operate without proper command integration. Today, as we face new threats and develop new warning systems, we carry with us the lessons of those 7 minutes. In the eternal vigilance that freedom requires, there are no unimportant warnings, no insignificant signals, no second chances once the moment passes. The echo of those 7 minutes still resonates today, a reminder that in the space between detection and decision, between warning and action lies the difference between security and catastrophe.